Let me now turn to my left to James Cameron, coming from a different space, connected to trying to mobilize financial capital markets in the financial city of London, trying to work with business leaders and mobilizing these constituencies and these communities towards these agendas. James, how do we effectively engage investors, banks, and business leaders from around the world, very, very practically, towards Rio Plus 20 with this agenda? Well, what do we need to do? And can it be done? And can it be done realistically?
It's not a great deal of time. Is this right now? To make a complete transformation in how we value the essential resources for life on Earth, which is really what is behind these propositions. So let me just make my assessment of where we are, and then I will turn to your question. We've made a modest start, beginning to value the externality associated with industrial emissions through putting a price on carbon in some parts of the world. And that experiment, because that's exactly what it is, at very early stages, has produced some good stories, a narrative of investment that provides some encouragement that we could move on to these absolutely necessary but more challenging revaluations of the vital assets for human society to thrive and prosper in a world affected by climate change. And that experiment has given some experience to the investment community about the risks and opportunities associated with a public policy-driven marketplace. But unfortunately, it's not all good. That marketplace doesn't function as well as it should do. The incentives are not as clear and not as long as they should be. They're not in as many places as they should be. Some very big markets like the United States of America don't exist yet. And so before I go on to this, let me just say that we have little prospect of making these ideas, these necessary ideas, flourish if we can't make putting a price on carbon work. But at least we've made a start down that route. Now, I happen to think that there is an extremely exciting investment opportunity associated with the transformation that we are discussing. At the moment, it lies largely in resource efficiency, in finding value, in reducing inefficiencies associated with the way in we use all natural resources. Carbon is just a proxy for the better management of energy. The key nexus, the place where I think most opportunity lies for investment over the next generation, not just the next 2 years, is in the relationship between energy, water, and food, all of which have been mentioned in the first 2 presentations. And we don't concentrate intellectual effort, and certainly not investment effort, on that relationship. And part of the reason is we've taken for granted the provision of those services, as Andrew says, largely for free. And in some cases we've lacked the political courage to put a price on those assets because the interest in the way are too strong, or the fear of popular retribution come voting time was too strong. But we have absolutely no option but to focus on that relationship between energy, water, and food. You could add security to all 3, but that's what it's about. It's about human beings surviving and prospering in an environment where resources are scarce. They are fundamentally scarce, but they are being made more scarce by the consequences of our industrial development over the last 200 years. Right, so you said in the next 2 years, what are our chances? Well, it's obvious that we should place it at the center of the Rio Plus 20 agenda. But 2 years is a very short time in negotiating time. Although I have to say, having been a veteran of these negotiations for many, many years, We did manage to go from a standing start to the Framework Convention on Climate Change signed in Rio in just a little over a year. I mean, those negotiations began in earnest in February and were completed in May the following year. Right? So it's not impossible to move things quickly. But to get the business community fully engaged, you have to appeal, this is a cliche, but it's true. You have to appeal to greed and fear. You also have to reconfigure what it means to be competitive. It's just a harsh truth that competitiveness arguments dominate discussions about the effect of any intervention by governments to reorient an economy, to shift around who wins and who loses. But mostly when businesses use competitiveness arguments, they don't want to compete, actually, they want protection. Most competitiveness arguments are about, please look after me because somebody else is beating me in my own game. And it's the same with governments. So what we have to do is we have to take the competitiveness arguments and flip them upside down and argue as persuasively as we possibly can, flat out in this next 2-year period, that future competitiveness is based upon resource efficiency. The next wave of industrial innovation, of business innovation, is all about resource efficiency. And that needs repricing, but more broadly revaluing, because pricing is not quite enough. Pricing helps, but it's not the whole story. You have to revalue the assets upon which we depend to survive and prosper. Now, I happen to think we've got signs already that this industrial innovation is underway. The business innovation is underway. There are enough good examples. That doesn't mean to say that the power in our way has been moved. It has not. Moved a little bit here and there. But I'll give you a couple of examples of where I think there's hope in the transformation, and the business community will get it. The first is that we're already seeing signs of business innovation around resource efficiency. You're seeing businesses that are emerging with very, very strong balance sheets, highly well capitalized, very determined, very well organized, who they will continue to grow and be very successful because they will help us manage resources more efficiently. And they tend to emerge out of another sector, not energy. They emerge out of ICT, businesses like Cisco, who confidently predict they're going to offer a service to the world in managing these resources. But the clue in there is the shift away from valuing the commodity alone to valuing the service attached to it. We're seeing this in the automotive industry, just beginning to learn that the capital cost of a car is just a bit of a waste of resource. The way we use the car is inefficient in 100 different ways. Switching to a service associated with mobility looks interesting as a business model shift. When we start to put a price on carbon in more places, you will see huge innovation around industrial energy efficiency, as well as in green buildings and infrastructure that currently is wasteful of energy. Then we've got to put a price or have a value associated with water, and we've got to start to value hydrological systems, watersheds, and that feeds very much into the point made about the revaluation of land. So my final comment is largely to do with land and property. What will completely transform the fortunes of Latin American nations that are rich in natural resources is rethinking the value of land in 3 ways. 1, does the land contain adequate water resources? Is there something about the hydrological cycle that tells you this land ought to be worth more for what it has now and into the future? 2, is the land capable of generating energy, renewable energy in particular? Is there something in the nature of the land that allows you to see it as an asset from the point of view of generating renewable energy? And 3, is there something about the land that allows you to sequester carbon? Is there something about the land that also has a potential to maintain biological diversity? These ecosystem services, biological diversity, things like this that are not quite ready in many instances for the kind of direct valuation that you can have with carbon sequestered from an industrial energy project, although I think there are some very good examples from Andrew's work that are can be applied directly, but some of the biodiversity ones are harder. Nonetheless, each and every piece of whether it's privately owned or publicly owned or a nation as a whole can look again at the value of land and answer, does that land hold the key to energy, water and food security? In which case, public policy needs to intervene to value the investment in that space. And then you will see capital move at scale into alleviating these severe risks that we face.
Thank you very much, James. If you think about the next 2 years and some of the processes that are already taking shape, and that might be the product of this workshop, is there one thing that you would like to see out there being pushed?
Well, okay, it's not a single, it's more of a cluster of things. First, there is work underway in the World Economic Forum on competitiveness. The forum has decided to integrate environmental matters in their regular review of competitiveness. This is quite an interesting opportunity to start to get some of these ideas to filter through, to define the nature of what it means to be competitive in a modern resource-constrained world. Secondly, it's vital that business, especially business from your part of the world, presents itself in the negotiating process in a confident, optimistic way, focusing on how to solve problems, to stop the very negative, very tired debate that business loses from this transformation. You know, which business, whose business? It depends. There are lots of businesses that win very, very strongly from the transformation that we must make. So we have to hear business present itself in this process so that government negotiators know that when they listen to business, there is a voice that is a progressive and confident voice that will show growth, economic opportunity, prosperity for the communities they represent from making the change that we've got to make. And there are ways in which that can be done. I mean, I think President Calderon has done a very good job at this meeting coping with difficult circumstances, because we're not going to have a great hurrah moment at the end of this week when everything is resolved. But he has made a good effort in making better business connections. And I think he's really serious about displaying the opportunities that do exist in building a growth strategy for countries like Mexico that are not dependent upon perfect success of the multilateral process, that are not waiting for money, technology, know-how to come from the wicked north and west. He's not doing that. He's trying to develop a national strategy that is about growth and dealing with these issues. And you've got to be present in those debates wherever you come from, so that that comes through in the negotiating process and makes Rio Plus 20. And for me, it's really quite an emotional thing. I will be one of those people, I can see others, who will turn up in Rio having been there 20 years ago. And as this argument has ebbed and flowed over the years, there have been many quite depressive moments. Right? Now, I think we've got 2 years to generate some real confidence, especially in the entrepreneurial community. I don't mean business I think we can redefine also what it is what business really is. I'm interested in enterprise. And I want enterprises who know that they can help solve these problems and do well as they solve these problems, that life can get better having addressed our resources in this direction. And why not have that spirit emerge from this community in Rio, as just to show the way that we can't carry on with these very negative trade-offs between economy and environment, business and government. And enterprise is a slightly broader concept than just business. It involves other characters and personalities, and it, on the whole, can be better turned to these really big systemic problems in a more confident way.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.